policy ceiling of this county. So as a result, the committee recommended $70 million. In the end, FY20 budget reflects $75.2 million, still slightly higher than committee recommendation, but much, much lower than historical. As you can tell that historically, the county issued around 90 or above $90 million of GO. The committee at that point also made a recommendation about a multi-year projection. Their revenue reflect about 2% of growth because of multiple factors driving a slowdown of revenue growth. Even before the pandemic, there's already a projection about a slowdown of economy after the nation experienced a long economic recovery. Also, local legislative impact, for example, Apple, are expected to have significant impact on all kinds of development-related revenues like property tax, income tax, fire tax, school surcharge, transfer accreditation tax, etc. And in fact, one of the consultants 2 years ago was making a projection in 2022, when some of the moratorium kicks in based on Apple, the county could lose up to $15 to $16 million each year starting from 2022. The county also is experiencing demographic changes and the housing changes there, which also are likely to generate a slowdown of revenue going forward. So as a result, it's likely to be a very big gap between projected revenue and expenditures in coming years on that. The report also made some other observations or recommendations. Some of those actually are already endorsed by the government. For example, revenue options or fee review at this point. At this point, the county is in the process of RFP for fee review, and also the county council already approved the e-transfer tax increase 25 cents. That's going to support multiple CIP projects going forward. Legislative impact analysis that's also reflected in CB8 and CB55, which requires both the county auditor's office and also the county executive branch to provide fiscal analysis rightfully for the different legislations there. In terms of realist multi-year budgeting, FY21 adopted CIP book made significant progress there in produce a more realistic 5-year plan. Historically, the county's future year CIP in the budget book usually represent 3 to 4 times of the likely affordable level funding. So we made a big progress with the support of elected officials from both executive and legislative branches there. And we were able to bring down the future years more closely to fiscal reality. Also, in terms of fund balance, to protect fund balance there, we're going to make some decisions there, and it's going to be reflecting careful to protect the county and provide more flexibility going forward. And in terms of time frame, as we just talked about, we have already decided to extend the time frame for the committee for more productive discussion. So next section, we're going to go to the fiscal update, but I want to pause for just 1 minute to see anybody has questions there before we move to the next section. If you have a question, you can unmute yourself. I'll pause for a minute. Okay, if no more questions, so let's move to the fiscal update. I'm going to invite Sam, our chief of staff, to provide an update about the CARES Act spending program. Sam, are you in the meeting?
Yeah, I'm on. Can
go ahead.
Everyone hear me? I'm getting a little bit of an echo. Am I good, Holly?
Yes, you are good. And anybody, okay, if you find yourselves unmuted, please just make sure mute yourself. Okay, Sam, go ahead. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody for getting up very early this morning. As Holly said, my name is Sam Sid, and I am the Chief of Staff to the County Executive Calvin Ball here in Howard County. I'm going to give you a brief overview today of how we've managed our federal CARES Act allocation as a county. It's been, quite an effort to manage a sizable amount of money in a very short period of time. So if we could go to my first slide, there you go. So our total allocation, I'll start with how much money we got. As a county, Howard County was allocated $56.8 million by federal formula through the CARES Act grant. But there's some qualifications on that number, and it's actually a little bit less that county government's working with. So under the CARES Act, jurisdictions with under 500,000 residents were treated differently than jurisdictions with over 500,000 residents. And the big difference was that our funding had to pass through state government in order for us to receive it. And that had two key impacts. First, going through the state process on top of the federal process, we had to work out grant agreements and other details with our state partners. And that delayed our receipt of CARES Act funding by about 5 to 6 weeks. Larger jurisdictions in the state got their money in mid to late April. We got our money on around June 1st. And the second impact was that the state decided to split the county's allocation into two, with half of the funds coming directly to county government. So that would be a $28.4 million amount. And the other half of funds being allocated to the local health department, but that amount is dispersed by the state on a reimbursable basis and treated very differently and goes through a different approval process. Conversely, jurisdictions with over 500,000 residents receive their full allocation directly from the federal government without going through that process. We were lucky enough to work with our health department, and they'd agreed to grant Howard County government $9 million of its allocation. So that brings our total pot, as you can see at the bottom of the first slide, to about $37.4 million that county government itself is managing in CARES Act funding. So we can go to the next slide. There's a couple key limitations that I'll talk about in terms of how this money can be spent, 3 of them to be exact. And the first is that funds from the CARES Act can only be used to cover unbudgeted expenses. And this is kind of ensured that our funds are only used to cover new expenses that have arisen from the pandemic. So, things like already budgeted expenses, we, for the most part, cannot use our money to cover. And revenue shortfalls can't be plugged with the money from the CARES Act. The second limitation is that our funds must be expenses that are incurred between March 1st of 2020 and December 30th of 2020. We've worked a lot with our federal counterparts, had some consultant support, and there's been a lot of debate over the meaning of the word incurred, so to speak. But the general guidance we've received on what that word means for the purposes of this grant is that the funds have to be in the hands of the end user by the December 30th deadline. Items like invoice processing, we have a little bit more time to complete. The grant allows for invoices to be processed up to 90 days following the expiration of the December 30th deadline. And the last point, and I could probably do a separate presentation just on this point, I won't do that, but is that funds must be used on necessary expenditures incurred due to the pandemic. And again, that definition of a necessary expenditure, there's a lot of differing detail and guidance. That's evolved over time, and we've continued to receive updated guidance from the federal government on what's classified as a necessary expenditure. But that's basically, kind of a third limitation on what we can use our funds for. So if you go to the next slide, so we've been tasked with managing a lot of money in the course of a pandemic, kind of on the fly and figuring out the best way to use these funds. And we've operated with 2 key strategies that have guided our decision making. And the 2 goals that we've looked at are, 1, using the funds to address what I classify as ever-changing, evolving community needs as we've seen during the pandemic. And second has been to ensure the continuity of government during this time period. So in terms of addressing community needs, obviously this pandemic has had consequences for businesses, families, and students alike. And we've been fairly aggressive in creating grant programs and creating other allocations of this funding to address this use. And I'll go through some of what we've done. The first and most timely is that just yesterday, we announced a $5.9 million grant of CARES Act funding to the school system to support instructional model enhancements. And these fit into a couple buckets, primarily going to support technological needs like Chromebooks and other supplies and software, public health and safety equipment, which is still needed even though there's a virtual learning environment. There's still small group activity, Students are coming in for meals. There's still staff on site. Some money for meals for students, and a last bit of allocation to cover increased unemployment costs that have arisen through the pandemic. Secondly, we've allocated a total of $5.5 million to business assistance grants, and we've done this in 2 rounds. Primarily, we've got this money for a finite period of time, and we wanted to make sure that, we were ready for a lengthy pandemic, and I think that's been the right decision. So our first round of grant money through this business assistance grant program supported 249 childcare providers, 202 retail businesses, 146 restaurants, 45 farms, 21 hotels, and 3 performing art venues. And just this past Thursday, we announced that we've released our second round of grant funding for business assistance that will continue to support even more businesses as they weather rollbacks and new restrictions throughout the course of the pandemic. We've also allocated $1.6 million in just CARES Act money to rental assistance. And what I'll say about what we've done with rental assistance is that we've also received from a separate pot of money called the Community Development Block Grant, $1.9 million for rental assistance. So we've done $3.5 million in allocation to the county to support rental assistance so far to date. We've allocated $1.5 million in support to nonprofits in the county, which have supported over 40 nonprofits that have been critical partners in actively supporting our community through a variety of different mechanisms through the pandemic. I won't go through everything we've done, but some of the other things that we've done, we did $750,000 for our Hill Coast Scholars Program, which allows for in-person instruction for selected middle school students. Digital equity has been something that we've hit. We did $450,000 there to ensure that there's internet access and Wi-Fi hotspots for students. 300 grants total for food access. We did a $60,000 grant to legal aid for legal assistance for tenants facing eviction. This was important as the moratorium on evictions that was set off by the state was expired on September 1st. So we had to deal with kind of a flood of evictions coming in. And then we've also subsidized childcare offerings from the county through our own Department of Rec and Parks. We can go to the next slide. So continuity of government, I'll go through quickly what we've spent CARES Act funding on to date, and we continue to incur expenses in this area as well. But we've spent nearly $3 million in supply purchases, and that's facilitated telework, gone to supplies for ensuring the safety of county employees, hand sanitizer, and different things. We did $2.8 million to provide hazard pay to employees dedicated to responding to the pandemic in the form of one-time lump sum amounts. We've done $1.8 million in salary overtime for employees also responding to the pandemic. That money's primarily gone to our staff from the Department of Fire and Rescue Services, our police department, and Rec and Park staff. And we've done $1 million in additional services. Cleaning has been a big one in that category, needed to adjust to the pandemic. If you go to the next slide, I'm kind of getting a blank on the slide screen, but I'll keep talking. Just yesterday, we launched our CARES Act spending dashboard, which is going to allow the public to track how we've spent these funds to date. And this dashboard shows both where we've allocated funds and where spending has actually been processed today. And that processing timeline has a little bit of a lag to it. So at this point, again, we've allocated and have a plan to spend 100% of our funds by the December 30th deadline. And we've processed spending for a little bit over $14 million of our allocation. We've started to see that actual spend figure grow rapidly. I think in just the past week, we've processed about $2 million in invoices, and we have another $2.4 million in processing right now that'll be reflected shortly. And as I referenced earlier, the invoice processing, the federal grant guidelines allow a 90-day period following the expiration of the grant for processing. So again, we have a plan. We're very confident that we're going to be able to spend all our funds by the federal deadline. And the last thing I'll hit on is just kind of looking forward. You know, our needs as a county aren't going to go away on December 30th, and we're fully cognizant of that, and we're making preparations to prepare for that eventuality. We're hopeful that Congress is going to pass the second round of stimulus funding. There's been a lot of talk about that at the federal level. We're in frequent conversations with our federal delegation, and we know what they're doing all they can to secure an additional round of funds. But in the event that there aren't additional funds, we're going to try through our budget process to make accommodations and prepare to continue to support our community moving into next year. And so with that, I'll stop and I'll take any questions on my presentation.
Does anyone have questions? If you have, you can unmute yourself and then ask Sam questions there.
Hey, Sam, it's Josh Zucker. Some of the spending, would be helpful for us, and maybe we can get a better idea. Because I was thinking during your presentation, I don't know if $1 million to something is a lot or a little, or if it's on top of spending that was already made. Is there any documents or information that we could get supplemental to this that shows that some of this is revenue enhancing, that it's on top of a program that already exists, so we can get an idea of whether this is just one time, obviously this is one-time new spending, but
right,
what are we spending on these programs if there were no CARES Act? And obviously that there are certain outlays that are just completely unique to this pot of money. But if there are areas that are just being supplemented by CARES Act, that would be helpful just in our review.
Sure. And by nature of the grant program, I'd say the vast majority of funds, it's not money that's being spent supplementally. Again, these are expenses that have to be necessary due to the pandemic. So there's kind of that dividing line.
Yeah.
Our rental assistance money, we do rental assistance activity in the county anyway, but we've allocated additional funds, and additional funds have been made available because of the pandemic. So, I think there's additional information I can get to Holly, but to answer the question, I'd say the vast majority of this activity has been, activity that would not have occurred but for the pandemic.
Right, but are there, are we paying, RTA drivers who suddenly don't have the traffic on their routes that they normally would, and and with no fares coming in, we're just trying to keep them solvent, things like that.
Sure. We can, I'll work with Holly and see what we can pull together.
Okay. Sam, this is Chao. I have a question.
Yes.
So it seems the CARES Act still have a lot of money holding on, but the spending period, I remember December coming very soon. So what are we going to do for the extra money? That's the first question. Second question, are you foreseeing there will be more money going to HCPSS? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So to the first question, again, so we have 14 million in actual spend that's been reflected, but we've allocated all of the money at this point to various purposes. So I went through some of the allocations for business assistance, for the school system, for rental assistance, a lot of purchases for supplies for our PFRS and police department. So again, I think it's a matter of the invoice processing catching up to the actual activity. So at this point, I'm fully confident that we're going to be able to spend our full allocation by the deadline. In terms of money for the school system, I don't anticipate another grant at this point, just because we're so late in the grant period. Again, $5.9 million of 37.4 is a significant amount. And it was something that we work with the school system to arrive at in terms of an amount. It comes out to about $100 per student. If there's a subsequent round of stimulus money, certainly we'll continue to work with the school system to assess needs. And the last point I'll bring up is the school system also did get $13 million from a separate funding source through the CARES Act. So there is other monies that the school system has received in CARES funding as well.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. And one part I want to add in terms of technical explanation for the first part of the question is that what's reflect here in actual, it's really reflect all the invoice get processed, which itself has a lag. Sometimes could be a couple of months on that. It doesn't represent what has been allocated. Just use school as example. For example, the 5.9 million has been entirely be allocated, but zero is captured in the actual spend amount because of the timing on that.
Correct.
So I just want to clarify on that. Thank you. Okay.
Todd Arterburn here. Quick question.
Todd, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Is the county able to track the success of the grants that's made to small businesses and community organizations? It seemed like there's, if I was hearing you correctly, there were literally hundreds of beneficiaries of those grants. Does the county know the materiality of those grants and whether or not those companies and community organizations have been able to survive the pandemic even with those grants? Because they seem to be fairly small given the number of recipients.
Yeah, and again, that's a fair point, and we've had to spread the money out to cover a lot of need, and it's a finite amount of money. In terms of the business assistance, Larry Tweedle's coming on. I think he could probably speak better to kind of the success rate in keeping businesses open. I think anecdotally, our feedback is that the money's been helpful. Of course, the needs probably exceed the amount that we're able to grant, but we're constantly monitoring, and we have different meetings and interactions set up both with our business and nonprofit community to kind of keep our finger on the pulse of evolving needs during the pandemic. So I think the money's been helpful, but I don't think it necessarily covers all the needs that businesses and nonprofits have right now due to kind of a massive disruption in their business model.
Thank you. And thank you for the good questions too, Sam.
Hey, Holly.
Uh-huh.
Hi, this is Leonardo.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I guess let me find my camera, I guess for the record. So just to add to that comment, in talking with Larry, because he and I have been pretty much joined at the hip over these last few months. One of the things that we also wanted to do in Howard County, or at least that we discussed, was in comparison to other places where they did a lot of their grants on a first come, first serve basis. We tried to put timelines, I guess you could say, or I guess maybe delivery dates as to when applications could be in. So at various times we could do it in some respects by merit, as opposed to just if you got your application in first, then you got the funding. And part of that was also, again, I think, again, as Sam touched on it, trying to be, I think, maybe strategic or thoughtful as to how do we really stretch the dollars out. In larger jurisdictions like Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Baltimore City, where I think, or either Baltimore County, one of the four, but they had instances where, obviously because they're larger, they got their money quicker, but then they just had this onslaught of applicants and ultimately kind of exhausted some of their early business funds practically within days or what have you. And so part of that here was trying to figure out, while on the one hand perhaps not giving as much, but at the same time, how do we help more, and how do we perhaps be a little bit more strategic, perhaps even as it relates to perhaps the industry sectors, as well as having, again, a specific due by date in terms of applications, as opposed to just get it in as fast as you can and you get the money.
Yeah.
And I'll add on to that. As Sam had said, we were strategic in keeping some dry powder because we were preparing for a longer term pandemic. So we have the second phase of funding now underway. Part of that process is the folks who got grants in the first round, they're eligible for a second tranche of funds, and they're recertifying that, yes, they're still in business. Yes, they, plan to still be in business. So we're able to collect that data sort of real time from the first grants into this second round of grants. And, as Sam said, we'll be, also studying this into, first and second quarter of next year to see that, what was this funding, although it can't meet all the needs, there's no possible way, but, was it enough to help them get through the worst part of it?
Thank you. That's a perfect transition because our next speaker is Larry. He's going to go over some slides to show the COVID impact on our business, as well as some more details regarding assistance to business programs there. So Larry, I think you are made the speaker now. Can you try to share your screen?
All right. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. All right. All right. Holly, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead. It looks good. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Took a little lag on my processor here. We're just going to do a quick glimpse into some of the impacts COVID has had. One of the metrics we track is the commercial real estate market, vacancy rates, and typically in a normal year, below 10% is a good number. It means you have some inventory on the shelf. The blue line is here, Howard County. This is all of the products that we have: office, industrial, retail. You can see how we were pretty healthy, below 8% across product lines. Started to spike a little bit, but this compares us to how we're looking at that against some of our peer counties. Similar trend lines, but we had one of the better vacancy rates in the region. When we break the Howard County market apart into the various product types, office, industrial, retail, and flex space, which is could be warehouse, could be an office type of product. We start to see some spikes in the office market and the retail market, not surprisingly. Now this is through third quarter of 2020. But on the other side of that, we are seeing big demand in the industrial market. So while we might be losing some ground in the office retail space in the short term, demand for industrial space along the Route 1 corridor is very strong. Jump into unemployment and unemployment insurance claims quickly. We were really at historic lows before the pandemic at, sub 2.5%. You can see how we spike along with the rest of the region in March and April. It just goes vertical to over 8%. Since then, it has been coming down throughout the summer as businesses started to open and pick up. Unemployment was coming down. We're still at about 5.5%. Good trends. We're watching this closely. It was heading in the right direction, as it was throughout the region. Employees filing initial UI claims, and you can see since going back to March how unemployment insurance claims really started to spike throughout the spring. Again, following the unemployment lines, it started to trend down in a good way throughout the summer. More recently now, things are starting to spike again, so we're watching this very closely. It's still quite high, and we're cautiously watching as we move into the colder months. We're going to probably expect to see some spikes as some of the restaurants may have to slow down due to just there's going to be less outdoor seating. So we're watching that closely. Here's how the unemployment insurance claims stacked by industry sector. Obviously, accommodation and food services was among the hardest hit. Healthcare and social assistance was initially one of the first hard hit, as well as elective procedures were constrained. Retail, trade, arts and entertainment. So these were some of the hardest hit industry. When we took a look at some of those most exposed sectors, and our friends at Baltimore Metropolitan Council did some collecting some good research for us as well. Looking at the most exposed employment sector, it falls into 6 general categories: restaurants and bars, sensitive retail, travel, transportation, entertainment, personal services, and sensitive manufacturing. And by sensitive retail, we're talking about department stores, auto dealers, clothing stores, home furnishings, jewelry, luggage, and the like. Sensitive manufacturing would be furniture, motor vehicle parts, apparel manufacturing, ship and boat building, motor vehicle manufacturing, motor vehicle parts, so those kinds of categories. So that's what we're kind of categorizing as our most exposed employment sectors. Here's how those sectors compare across the region. About a little more than 17% of our business base falls into those exposed sectors, and you can see how that compares to other counties in the region. Employment in those sectors, specifically for Howard County, we're looking at over 11,500 workers in restaurants and bars, retail almost 9,000, over 3,500 in entertainment, manufacturing a little over 1,000, travel, transportation a little over 1,000 as well. So obviously we're very concerned about the restaurants, bars, and our retail merchants. When you look at those exposed versus non-exposed sectors, here's how it breaks down in terms of like the wage categories. And this is stacked in terms of dollars per hour. You can see some of our most exposed sectors are fewer than $12 an hour, $14 an hour, $16 an hour, and the inverse on some of the non-exposed sectors in terms of this is basically this is showing us that the hardest hit are amongst our most vulnerable. A little deeper dive into the wage levels, and this is by race in Howard County, and again by the tranches of dollars per hour, and you can see how 25% of the jobs in Howard County are held by Black workers, and how they are amongst the most vulnerable in the terms of the wage categories in the exposed sectors. So this gives you a deeper glimpse into who personally is being affected by this pandemic. Another look at it in terms of wage level by gender. On the previous recession, male workers were more impacted. This crisis, it's impacting the female workers more. This is just a glimpse. Sam already kind of ran through the numbers. This is the business assistance grants. This was phase 1. We've gotten $2.2 million out the door. In phase 2, because we were strategic in keeping our powder dry, all of the folks who got funds the first round are eligible for second round of grants. Those grants will be larger in value, and we're also getting a lot of new applicants as well. So we're having I think by keeping this second round till later in the year, we really have the businesses need it more. They're getting more assistance, and we're helping a wider section of our business community. That's all I've got right now, Holly. We'll definitely get into some more things throughout some of the later sessions in the spending affordability process here. But I'll take some questions now, and we'll be back in a later session in a few months.
Thank you, Larry. I know Larry has to leave in about 8 minutes on that there, but if anybody has questions, please take the opportunity to ask him. Okay, seems no questions. Larry, thank you so much.
I have one question. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Took me a minute to find the mute button. Larry, do you expect the vacancy rates to tick up as leases and contracts expire? Or is that baked into some of the models you have?
We've been talking to a lot of the landlords and developers. A lot of their tenants are like delaying their decisions. They're either like doing short-term extensions to really better understand what their office demands are going to be, because there's a lot of debate right now in that, do we need more space for social distancing, or do we need less space because we're on a sort of more of a flex work schedule. So a lot of folks are delaying their decisions. We are seeing the defense contractors are still office space is still very strong for that. Others, it's a little bit of a question mark, but we know industrial is being very strong. So it's going to be a bit of a mixed bag. My hunch is office vacancy is going to go up a bit in the short term, but on the other side of that, we're seeing strong demand for industrial and warehouse space.
Thank you.
All right, if there's no other questions, I'm also always available. Send me some questions either through Holly or directly to myself, and we'll see you back next week.
Thank you very much, Larry. Take care. All right, so going back to the presentation, so let me share my screen again. 1 minute. All right, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so our next discussion is about a fiscal update. At this point, as you know, some of the critical information or data are still not available to do quantified level of projection for our next fiscal year. So that's why typically it's in January to February that we present that to the first round of preliminary projections to the committee. But I just want to share with you where we are or what we know at this point, at least conceptually. What has been happening is really interesting. Local governments, including Howard County, actually did surprisingly well, at least for the first few months of the pandemic, which is pretty much the last quarter of fiscal year 2020. However, that's really attributable to one-time and temporary factors there. As you're already aware of from last year's committee, the county received some one-time significant reconciliation, a distribution in income tax that's related to federal tax law change 2 years ago. This is not repeatable, it's one-time money, but nevertheless, we received that in FY20. The other thing is, fortunately, the federal government provided very fast and sizable stimulus package. It's very, very helpful to a lot of state and local governments there. In particular, those direct checks, expanded unemployment insurance, etc., have been holding the personal income from a significant drop as originally has been projected. Back to May, I think the State Controller's Office was predicting a double-digit, could be 22% drop of personal income during the pandemic months. In reality, what they showed us is they don't have the data down to the county level, but statewide, actually there's a spike in personal income, at least in the first couple months during the pandemic. And explanation is because those very strong stimulus package and for unemployed population who has been raising very quickly in those period of time, they were able to get extra amount of checks and other programs that has been helped them from actually showing a decrease in the personal income. Again, that's a temporary factor because as we all know, some of those policy already expired a few months ago. The other thing is CARES Act funding, as Sam and Larry has been explaining. These actually provide huge help to us and other local governments. It allows us to cover those extra spending in our agencies, overtime, personal protecting equipment, etc., but also allow us to provide needed help to our community, including the residents impacted, nonprofits, as well as business there. However, as we all know, that's also going to expire by the end of December. The issue is that those temporary strong performance of the revenue is not really a reflection of economic reality, but attributable to those one-time temporary factors there. So for example, Larry already showed you earlier that unemployment insurance new filings has been coming down gradually from the peak. However, one thing to keep in mind is the total employment insurance claims continues to come in. What to the left is the statewide data. It's showing that the curve has started to be less steep, but still growing in the past several months there, meaning that there's still a lot of people struggling and they are still in the process trying to find a job or comparable job to what they had before. The county's unemployment, as reflected in the bar graph, same thing. It has been improving compared to the peak time in April. At that point, we had tripled our unemployment rate compared to pre-pandemic level, but at this point, it's still doubling the pre-pandemic level. And also what we have been hearing recently is that things has been softening. Actually, the recovery of the employment has been suffering because of the pandemic itself. There has been experiencing a spike recently, both in Maryland and in other places there. As Larry mentioned earlier, some of the industries or sectors has been hit particularly hard. Those are hospitality, entertainment, retail, service industries, and in particular, small business are hit relatively hard, and many of them are still struggling at this point. There's also a lagging factor when it comes to revenue proceeds there. For example, the recordation tax, surprisingly, throughout the last quarter of last fiscal year, still holding pretty well, partly because some of the transaction was already in the process or in the pipeline, so they still go through the process there. However, in the last quarter of fiscal year 2021, they actually has been dropping by 24% compared to the same period last year. They finally start to show signs of weakening. Hotel motel tax also dropped by 60% for the first quarter of this fiscal year, and they have been experiencing double-digit decreases for multiple months. There are some other revenues may even take longer, as we just talked about there. For example, the property tax. Larry mentioned a little bit about what's happening or the uncertainty regarding the business or commercial based market there. What we find it out or heard from the news is that some of the business might take it into longer consideration in terms of allow employees to work remotely, so that might transition into less needs for office space there. And also, as we know that malls, these physical malls are deteriorating as people are more getting used to using online purchase their online sales on that. So all those could transition into future years weakening in terms of commercial base, personal property tax, as well as real property tax growth there. And also Maryland has a 3-year phasing for real property tax. That's another reason that some of the softening we may not see immediately, but it could impact us in the coming years. Looking forward, we know there are challenges and uncertainties there. The challenges first come from those pandemic recession on revenues. We know there are some no obligations there. For example, capital projects there. We continue to see the debt service payment growth every year for existing and new bonds to support our capital projects there. And also the new courthouse, which is similar to a typical capital project there. We need to make payments on debt service as well as operating maintenance costs, and that's supposed to kick in next fiscal year. So that's also going to need to be taken care of. We also have to make up for quite some one-time solution FY21, as we just mentioned moments ago, that in order to avoid dramatic cuts to services or to our own employees there, we had to use some one-time solution FY21, including both one-time revenues as well as non-sustainable cuts there. Now we have to cover some of that in FY21, and that's going to use quite some resources there in FY22. And obviously, we also have to provide continued service to keep the same level of service. Plus, we have to step in to address some continuous needs from the community for pandemic recession impacted business or residents or nonprofits there. Even if that we may not have enough or quickly federal assistance for that. Now, the futures also features a lot of uncertainties. First is about the pandemic itself there. At this point, it's really hard to make a prediction about duration and severity of the pandemic itself there. The graph here was showing in Howard County, but it's in Maryland, but it's also similar to the nation in terms of the trend. As we all know about that, we have recently experienced a spike in the pandemic, which has obvious impact on economic activities itself, which is going to transfer to revenues. We also have significant uncertainties about when and the pace of the potential economic recovery down the road. There are so much unknowns at this point. The State Controller's Office, they actually hired 2 different consulting firms of economists there. And between May and September, they produced 4 different scenarios there. And number one, you can tell that those 4 scenarios are quite different, meaning that people have really huge uncertainty about what's going to happen in terms of the recovery path. But secondly, even the most optimistic one, as represented by the yellow line, was predicting it takes at least 2 years for the employment level in Maryland to approach the pre-pandemic level. The other 3 scenarios was actually thinking it's going to take 3 to 4 years to regain pre-pandemic level. This is not a pretty picture. It's basically saying after an immediate bounce back during the summer, things are slowing down and potentially takes much longer. Is it going to be a W-shaped type of recovery, or it's a swoosh type of recovery that's going to take much longer, dragging in the coming years? It's still kind of hard to tell at this point. And to some extent, that is actually going to be impacted by the federal policy making. In particular, the second round of federal stimulus package, which is going to be critical. Recently, 2 very well-known economists, one is Ben Bernanke, as everybody know about him, and the other one is very well-known in the economist circle, is Mark Sandy, who is chief economist at Moody's Analytics. They both mentioned that it's extremely important for state and local governments to get the benefit from the second round of federal stimulus. Otherwise, there is a possibility for significantly worse and protracted recession, as well as the double dip. And importantly, those second package needs to not only go to direct receivers, but also come to state and local governments. At this point, as we all know, the election result will likely come very soon. But how long it's going to take for both the president and also the Congress to make agreement about the package itself and how it's going to impact all those local state governments is kind of still pending at this point. We really wish that it can come quickly and with sizable but at this point we don't know. And the timing is really key. There are some other factors. We already talked about Apple, so we're not going to repeat that, but that's going to have impact on a lot of development-related revenues very soon. Stocks market, that's another factor. So it's unpredictable, but we know the market has been so good for so long. At some point, that may need a correction down the road. So given all those uncertainties and potential challenges, we already know it's going to happen that. So for early planning, we have been talking with our own county agencies recently and provide them instructions for the exercise there. So our own county agency have been instructed to provide two different scenarios. One is the request based on same service or same level of staffing budget. For example, if an agency last year has to freeze, say 5% of their workforce in the fiscal 21, we were asking them to produce the same scenario for FY22 and show us how much is the cost. Secondly, we also asked all of them to provide an alternative scenario with 3% reductions. So we have options there if we have to go down that route there. Obviously, it's going to be very difficult exercise because they're already under hiring freeze. They already have a lot of vacancies they cannot fill. At the same time, try to address the typical needs plus the pandemic needs there from the communities there. So I'm going to pause for 1 minute to see anybody has questions there before I go to the next session about future meetings as well as go around the table.
Holly, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So earlier you talked about the significant revenue drop from like hotel industry and others, but I just wonder how much is the percentage of hotel industry revenue to the county revenue? Because I know because at the same time, people say, so how the property price actually goes up, it's pretty good for them. So maybe that side, the revenue goes up. I just wonder, how do we project that?
So the hotel motel tax you're talking about, right?
Yes, I mean the both sides,
Yeah.
right? Hotel price, revenue goes down, but I heard in the property price actually goes up. So maybe that property tax actually goes up. So I just wonder, how do you really put them together to the whole impact?
Okay, so a couple of things. A hotel tax itself on that, I don't know the percentage, but I know like first quarter, for example, the first quarter of fiscal year 21, they dropped by, I think, 1.2 million from the same period of last year. So depending on how they perform for the rest of the year, if they maintain that kind of drop, then we'll probably have 6 million, 5 to 6 million drop compared to last year for hotel tax on that. But it all depends. If things started to improve later during the year, it may be less. So that's for hotel tax. Property tax is going to be complex. Number one, at this point, we don't have projection from a state. They wouldn't provide us a preliminary projection until at least 2 months later about preliminary projection, and reassessment information will be up actually at the beginning of next calendar year. So that's one thing, we don't have accurate data. The second thing is property tax is going to impact by multiple factors. On the positive side, as you said, sometimes because of the property less of supply, there could be appropriation of higher value in some property there. But on the other hand, there are other factors actually is potentially have downward adjustment. So for one thing, for example, if there's a foreclosure of the houses because people lost their job, they cannot keep the mortgage up to date, which is actually happening currently. And then down the road, that's going to impact house value. Actually, there'll be depreciation, not appreciation. The other thing is commercial real property. And again, some of the business, if they no longer have, if they have high vacancy for the office place there, etc., their property value is actually not based on, they actually are based on those occupancy and other factors on that. So they actually could report a dramatic decrease in property value. And even business personal property, because equipment, they no longer, they have to close the business, etc., that could be a drop on that. So it's going to be a mixed impact. My own thought is that it's more likely to be a net loss rather than a net gain from the pandemic in terms of overall impact. But the data itself is going to come along slowly, and also because of the fact that the state has a 3-year phase-in, so each year they only reassess certain part of the county for each county there. So some of the impact may not be realized immediately, but overall, I actually think it's going to be more likely softening rather than have a boost to the entire county's property base. But we will see later.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Other questions? Okay. Well, feel free to digest there. We have plenty of time to discuss on that. And also, hopefully after a couple months there, we'll have more information. At that point, we'll do more thorough presentation to the whole committee regarding revenue outlook. And also, we have economists there, and they will share their perspective about overall economy, which is going to inform the revenue projections. All right, so the next one is just quick housekeeping to talk about future meetings. As we mentioned earlier that we typically have 7 to 8 meetings. This year, we're gonna have 11 to 12 meetings there. Since we have a little bit more time, I think we want to take time to dive into some of the subjects a little bit more in a more thorough manner. For example, the next 3 meetings there, we plan to focus on CIP. We invited education entities to talk about CIP first, and followed by some critical infrastructure needs on the roads, streets, as well as big projects in Alec City, watershed, as well as senior center and detention center, some other big projects down the road or in the middle of the construction. So we get a better understanding of that. And CIP is critical as we continue to face the struggle, try to balance the needs of maintaining existing infrastructure as well as to cope with the needs for the new project to meet the community desire there. So there will be 3 meetings to discuss about that. And then Larry is going to host a panel discussion in early January about business development and the commercial base. As we just talked about, there are a lot of interest to understand better about both the COVID impact, but also from the long-term view, what are some of the strategies that can promote and also to boost our commercial base, especially in line of current economic environment. So I think that's going to be a timely and also important topic from a long-term view. Then the next few meetings, we plan to pretty much as usual designate operating budget discussion as well as economic and revenue and debt discussion. We already invited the superintendent to provide a presentation for operating budget in mid-January, and also leaders from community college and library as well. And then we will also invite some agencies from the county to talk about operating budget. So by early February, we should be able to finish most of the discussion, and then the committee can focus on a discussion of the key recommendations for the report. And historically, and we continue to do the practice, we'll put a small team from the committee to focus on the write-up of a drafted report, and they're going to bring it back to the full committee by late February for a final review, and then we're going to wrap up and deliver the report to the county executive by March 1st. So that's just a general process. So I think we still have a little bit of time, and so this is our first meeting, so we do have some new faces here as well. So I wanted to just give people opportunity to essentially everybody take, I think we can allow everybody take 2 minutes, a little bit longer than that there, to quickly introduce about yourself, where do you come, which organization or where, what line of business you're working on, and also give us like 1 or 2 minutes briefing about what do you see the impact from economic or factor or the pandemic on your own business. So I'll go with the alphabetic order, or you can just take turn there. So Tanya, do you want to start first?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Sun. From the library side of things, our biggest impact here has been materials and resources for classes. As you all are aware, we are operating virtually as well and have allowed customers to come in and pick up books in a contactless manner. But we still see very, very high requests and increased demand, of course, on e-resources. So it would be our ebooks and streaming services, which are a pay-per model that is very different than the individual consumer model in pricing structure. So to give you an example, we belong to the Maryland Consortium for e-resources for ebooks, and each library system in the state that participates pays a portion, and then all users can borrow from that pool of ebooks. We are the only system that exceeds, we are the only system in Tier 4, which exceeds 17% of the borrowing of all users. We're at 22%, and consequently, we are the only system in the tier that pays the highest amount, which is about $80,000 more than our next highest borrowing, which is Anne Arundel County. For e-materials. And so those type of impacts and that increased demand on both print, and streaming services is really what we are trying to balance right now, in addition to having enough online classes to meet customer demand. And so that's the huge impact for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. Todd, Todd, are you still there?
Good morning. I'm Todd Arterburn. With my brother, we own several real estate driven companies in the county. Probably the most interesting of which is BW Offices at Roosevelt Commons, which is a 50-unit executive office suites building at the entrance to the Meadow Ridge Business Park off of Route 1. So as it relates to the pandemic, our occupancy rate has held up very well. Actually, we're not down more than one or two tenants. Most of the tenants we've lost have been COVID related, but we have some, regular rotation of tenants out in any event. But we have also added tenants, and interestingly, probably over the last month, we've seen a lot more inquiries starting to come in from small operations that need individual or a couple of offices to run their businesses. So it's actually held up pretty well, but I will say that every month we kind of hold our breath to see what our renewals are going to be. We don't run month to month. We generally have 6 month to 12-month leases. So on a monthly basis, we might have 3 or 4 or 5 leases that are coming up. And we're always interested to see what's going to happen with our renewals, which typically are very, very high. But we have had a little higher loss of tenants during the pandemic. I will say that it's interesting that we can kind of do a parking lot survey, and the attendance at our building is way, way down, less than half of what it used to be pre-pandemic. So we probably don't have more than a dozen or 15 cars in our parking lot at any time. Pre-pandemic, you would often find 35 or 40 of our parking spaces taken up. So use of space is much lower, but many of our tenants have a requirement for space. They're state licensed businesses, or brokers or attorneys that must have offices. So they do maintain their offices, but they're using them in a much lower percentage than they did pre-pandemic. So we'll see how all of that plays out. I think over time, we may be the beneficiaries of mid-sized businesses that may have been trying to accommodate 8 or 10 office workers, and now they're only trying to accommodate 2 or 3, and then use conference room space to meet on an ongoing basis with their entire staff. So we'll see how it plays out. We're pretty much awash on that side of our businesses. But as I said, we are concerned about lower usage of space and how that might reflect the need for space going forward.
Thank you, Todd. That's interesting, the information to know, and so it's very, very timely. I think Dr. Clinch has another appointment, so I'll go to Lynn. Lynn.
Hi, I'm Lynn Coleman. I'm the Vice President of Administration of Finance at the Community College. Basically, we have gone to remote classes for the majority of our classes. We have hybrids in some areas because we have to do that for accreditation requirements. So those are primarily in our health sciences area. But I would say the majority of, that's probably only about 5 to 10% of our classes that are hybrid, and the majority are remote. So we did get a cut from the state. The state gives us about 20% of our budget, and we got a 14% cut from the state that we've had to absorb. So we had to take action, such as we unfortunately had to close our Children's Learning Center, mainly because there were more community members in the Children's Learning Center than were students. And so we had to look at what resources we could, divert to our students. So that was one action we had to take. Our non-credit area, which is about 20% of our FTEs, they have suffered dramatically. Their revenue is down about 50%, mainly because of the fact that they have a lot of in-person classes that they really can't hold at this time. So those are some of the impacts that we've had at the college.
Thank you, Lynn. Joanne?
Hi, I'm Joan Dreesen. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Community Services, which is really the umbrella organization for nonprofits in Howard County. We had multiple meetings starting in March with our members because, of course, everyone was trying to quickly switch to a virtual format, implement emergency programming. So we assisted with that process and helped people to make collaborations and partnerships so that they could continue. But over the summer, we decided we really needed to do an in-depth survey to see where things stood. So at that point, and this was end of July, 57% had moved to all virtual programs, which was quite a shift and quite an expense for many of them because technology is something that often nonprofits do not invest in as much as other sectors. 23% of the organizations had to create new emergency programs to meet the growing needs in the community. About 17% saw significant increases in demand for their services, but at the same time, about 17%, an equal number, saw decreases. And oddly enough, this was in the areas primarily of domestic violence, child neglect and abuse, and services associated with the foster systems around that. So with less reporting of it coming through the schools, coming from people who were still in their homes and could not report, there were actually initially decreases. Now, I think some of those are beginning to pick up. And the fee for service went down by 10 to 50%, with the bulk of them being in the 50% range since March 1st for 40% of the organizations. So that's a big hit to our nonprofits. Many of them are very dependent on that fee for service. 28%, and it was a big concern because they were drawing on cash reserves, and 28% had less than 120 days of cash reserves prior to March. So they were drawing those down pretty rapidly. 43% as a result reduced expenses. Most of those were in the contractor areas. They needed to continue to keep their staff employed, some of which had the PPP loans, so that was a requirement for that. 40%, though, had not replaced their in-person fundraisers. And I think everyone's familiar with the number of events in this county, and most of those are to help the nonprofit sector with their operating expenses. So replacing those is difficult. Many of us hold them in the spring. All of those were canceled. And replacing anything with a virtual for a large-scale event can take 6 months. So they had not replaced those, so they were still drawing down on those cash reserves. Those who did, and the ARC was one of those organizations, had fewer participants and less revenue. So we are still trying to figure out what to do. Many of us had postponed our events until the fall. Clearly that wasn't happening, so people are pivoting now to try to do the virtual fundraisers. But they're A, expensive to produce, B, we don't have as much experience doing it successfully, and C, you get less revenue from it. So we're all trying to pivot and trying to figure out how to stay afloat right now. I will say that individual donations are up by 25%. So the community has really been responding. We are finding ways to incorporate volunteers back into the programs, and we're highly dependent on volunteers. So the community has really been responsive. And our local funders have really pulled together to try to work together and meet the most pressing needs. So the Community Foundation, Horizon Foundation, Women's Giving Circle have all stepped up to try to respond appropriately. That's about where we are for right now.
Thank you, Joanne. It's very informative, not only for your own organization, just for nonprofit status in general. So thank you for sharing. Pierre, go ahead.
Representing Howard County Association of Real Secretary on their board. The housing are well aware that house prices have been going up, and while we've seen 3-4% increases over the last few years, this year definitely we're seeing well over 10% increase. So it actually, for selling, has been really good for prices, and that's solely driven, as far as we can tell, due to people pulling their houses off the market and not showing their houses. So inventory dropped, and consequently house prices went up. How does this affect buyers, sellers, and renters? Well, it's great to be a seller. House prices going up that much. The sellers are selling quickly and easily. More offers at full price, getting very frustrated. And there's also less rental inventory. It's tough to be looking for rental space right now for residential. The agents that represent the buyers are working harder than ever, making more offers, and those that are representing the sellers, they're having a great time. It's houses sell in a week, and so the types of agents definitely makes a difference. If you have a lot of buyers, it is a tougher year for you. If you're focusing on listings, it's a wonderful time. Brokers are the rumor is considering having less space if they can. Offices may be downsizing to space-wise and having more agents work from home. That I think will be a long-term ongoing trend. And where we're seeing things right now, prices, they're going to stay stable. And the prediction is that really the lower 1/3 may see some decrease, say spring or summer of next year. That's where the housing decrease will start. Our association has over 2,000 agents, and that's been an increase over the last 5 years from about 1,450. And this is our renewal time, so it'll be interesting to see, at least from an agent perspective, where things will be, whether we're going to see a significant decrease in agents or stay flat. But we've really seen a significant growth. What is that? 5% agents over the last 5 years every year, and it's anticipated that may change. Okay.
Thank you, Pierre, and welcome on board. Good information. How do you want to talk about our farmers or agriculture sector?
Just on my phone, the screen on the computer, but I'm the former president of the Howard County Farm Bureau. We also, my wife and I, run Mary Acres Farm. We board 50 to 55 horses. We've got 20 to 25 beef head, and we make 170 acres of hay. Farmers in general are doing pretty well. One of the biggest challenges was processing our beef products. We do not have a meat processor in Howard County, so we reach out to the surrounding areas, and we could not get dates for processing because it was just a jam with the shortage of larger processors across the country shutting down. So that made it a little difficult for a while, but it is catching up. The vegetable farmers are doing well, but I hesitate to say they're going to go into winter really well, because if weather holds warm, they can continue to get in their greenhouses and keep the the products coming and the produce growing. But if it's a hard winter, that could slow down drastically, and some of them have to put in extra heaters and things for to keep that going. So that could be a concern. As far as the crops with corn, soybeans, it was a pretty good year. We had a super hot July, and we've managed to keep plenty of moisture there. So the crops have actually grown well, but aren't drying down as well as other years. So that does slow harvest a little bit, but that's going to catch up, I'm sure. It's just one of those things. But other than that, the farming community is doing pretty well. We're trying to protect ourselves. A few guys have gotten the virus and recovered, and hopefully that will stay at a minimum. We have to go every day with what we do, feeding the animals. So it's a bit of a mental stress just to make sure you're protecting yourself. But we'll do the best we can. But it's good to be on board with you guys, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Holly, and welcome on board. Next is Dan. Dan, I think somehow cannot hear you. Is that because no? Yeah, should be fine now. But I think microphone, maybe you adjust the voice a little bit high or something like that. I still cannot hear you. I think you already unmuted yourself, but somehow the voice is not picked up.
Dan, if you want to put your number in the chat, I can call you and I can work with you to get you on.
Okay. Okay. So let's try this way. While Brandy, thank you very much, Brandy. While Brandy is helping Dan, let's move to the next one first, then we can come back to him. Alan, are you on? So it looks like Alan is not with us. I think he says she also has a conflict currently. So let's move to next one is John Hendrickson. John, are you here? Yes, I think I saw you earlier. John, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. JC Hendrickson. I'm on the Spending Council as just a member of the community. The sector I work in for my day job is, in the global humanitarian sector, typically commuting into DC for that. And, our sector has faced, a soup to nuts impact from this pandemic. But, just to stay relevant today, I think, impacts that my family and I have faced, fortunately for us, we both have stable, white collar jobs, my wife and I, so have not faced any challenges there. And also this is one of the times when I think we're lucky to have kids who are young enough that they can go to daycare, and our daycare has sort of stayed, hanging in there. So the sort of basics of this have been, we've been fortunate and have been okay. I think areas that we're concerned about are those that what everyone has spoken to today, which is, some of the businesses, some of our favorite businesses in the community, we're seeing going under, and our favorite coffee shop, in Elk Ridge, went under a few weeks ago, and we were really sad to see that. And for me, I'm a transit guy, and I commute into DC, as I mentioned, normally, and not using public transit to get to work, and seeing sort of the impact on revenues there is really alarming. Those are some of the bigger concerns that we have, and otherwise good to see everybody again, and looking forward to learning more about how the county is managing through all this. Thank you.
Thank you, JC. So I want to ask whether, Randy, are we still working with them? Looks like they are still. So let's move to the next one. I think it's Dr. Rani. And Dr. Rani, after you, then we'll come back to see whether Dan is available now. So Dr. Rani, I know you're an economist, so you don't have to only talk about your own organization. You can talk about more globally if you want. Thank you. Go ahead.
Sure. So thank you. So I'll talk a little bit about Towson University. I'm the Vice President for Strategic Partnerships and Applied Research. So, like all colleges, we did see a bit of a dip in enrollment. Our continuing students maintained. We did see a fall off in our freshman class. Applications were, on target, but again, those were pre-COVID. But I think decisions made about attending classes in the fall, many students sort of decided to opt out. The other challenge, obviously, on campus is we have a reduced density, so all of our dorms are singles, so it's not business as usual. So that's a challenge. 85% of our classes are online. We do have to have some classes in person, some practicums, clinicals, and such. So the challenge, it's a parking lot survey. I've driven up to campus every so often, and I see that parking lots are completely empty. So it is a big change. Staff, again, my own team is about 95% online. So we're working on various platforms. So that's been good. Overall, the economy struggles. I mean, as again, echoing JC, John Hendrickson's approach, both Wi-Fi are fortunate. We're working in white-collar professions that, allow us to work from home, but we do know that there are many challenges for individuals in some of the adversely affected business sectors. So we're concerned about that. I guess I will be speaking to this in the beginning of sort of the end of January, but this economy nationwide, Maryland will face significant challenges in the next 3 to 5 years to recover from the long-term impacts of the pandemic. So anyway, so thank you. Again, it's great to be back, and I look forward to working with everyone again.
Thank you, Dr. Rani. I believe Dan is okay to talk now. Dan, do you want to try?
Sure. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Great. So hi, I'm Dan Kick. It's my second year on the committee. I'm currently working with Sienna Corporation in supply chain management and procurement. Interestingly enough, I started with them in the beginning of March, on March 9th, and I worked exactly 3 days in the office, and they closed the offices, and I've been working remotely ever since. So it's an interesting way to start with a new organization. So if you're not familiar, Sienna Corporation is, they specialize in high-speed optical networking infrastructure and software solutions. They're based here out of Maryland, but work globally. So challenges with global supply chains have been quite challenging in some cases, but certainly we're managing to that. So as you would imagine, high-speed infrastructure and optical networking is a market that's certainly silver lining of COVID and pandemic is it's been certainly beneficial to our business. Now that being said, despite beating analyst estimates and having a really good first couple of quarters while it was there, pending outlook and orders from those telecom providers and network providers has been challenge. So it's becoming more and more unpredictable. So we're certainly a lot of that and impacts of global supply chains has certainly been impacting our business as well. But I guess coming into this, I'm really interested, and I think I heard Todd Arterburn say earlier the unpredictability of what the commercial real estate market is going to look like after all this is something I'm really interested in to see how we're anticipating that, not only just in just the short-term re-ups and renewals of leases, but then are we looking at and doing any kind of investigation into what businesses are predicting how businesses will change and how they do business? Because what I do know is Sienna Corporation, they've always been a remote working company, but that being said, that doesn't mean they didn't have a significant commercial real estate space over Anne Arundel County in this case. But what I do know is that companies like ours is going to be going much more to complete working remote with much more flex space than what ordinarily what companies would typically have. So I'm interested to hear how we're anticipating working through that model within the commercial. Because this time last year we were talking about how will we potentially draw more businesses and build more commercial real estate in the county with limited physical real estate available. What are we anticipating there? And then also kind of the parallel, now that kids have been going to school here remotely, and they've been adapting to that. Certainly not ideal, but they certainly adapted to that. What's the plan for that within Howard County, the school system as well? What are the anticipated changes and what facilities needs are going to be moving forward? I know I talk to my kids and I tell them, going forward, there may not be such a thing as a snow day anymore because of what remote learning brings. So I'm just curious as to how it's going to impact that portion of the county as well.
Thank you, Dan. I think these are all really good points there. Thank you. Barbara, you are up. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Barbara Lawson, and I'm a community volunteer, retired, and have been on the committee for several years. The things that I hear are mostly anecdotal. I've heard from several moms that are still trying to work and maintain a household and try to keep on top of their kids in terms of their homework and their experiences being online. So that it feels very challenging and they feel kind of burned out and tired and neglected. In my church, we're experiencing some financial challenges because of how offerings are done, but also the rental income for weddings and other activities that happen within the church is off. Probably my biggest area of concern is around elder care. No, there's another one. Food insecurity is huge. I regularly am taking food to the community care organization, and the line is unbelievable in Wild Lake. And when I read daily their reports, I see that wherever they are, they're impacted. And I know the Community Action Council is also being hit really hard. The food bank is stressed. But then I'll move on to elder care. I have a number of friends that have not seen their parents since March. And during this time, my mother died in a memory care facility. And I think it's not just the visitation that is hampered, but the ecosystem within our elder care facilities is hugely stressed. And I don't know that we've given enough concern and resources to that population. So those would be the areas that I'm most concerned about, and it's more anecdotal than having any real numbers to put behind it. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. It's still great information to know about, to share about, especially the nonprofits and the community needs there for the elderly, etc. I think that's very to the point. I think Milton has a conflict from CA, and Leonardo also seems to have left, right? Leonardo, I think you already have another meeting now. So I'll go to the next one, Steve. And Steve, by the way, I thank you so much for agreeing to be the vice chair again. And it's a big assistance and to the whole committee. And thank you for agreeing to serve again. Go ahead, Steve.
Hello, everybody. Steve Pointot. I am CIO at Howard Bank. I've been on the committee a number of years, a resident of Howard County for a number of years. And you know, it's been an interesting time at the bank. You know, we started the pandemic with, you know, processing a significant amount of PPP loans, kind of all hands on deck. Almost everybody at the bank was involved trying to help get money out to our clients as quickly as possible to help them through this. Now we're trying to take them through the confusing process of the forgiveness process of the PPP loans. It's not clear, it's not easy, and it continues to change. So we're working with them trying to do that. We were a company that was not remote, and we took a company that was not remote and made it remote in a couple of weeks, and have been able to function. And I would say, you know, 3 months in, everybody was, hey, this is great. We were able to function. We're able to help our clients. We're able to take care of our families. And now we're all at the point now where I think we're ready to kind of, like everybody else is, to kind of be back to normal, but we know we've got a long way to go for that. So I don't know that we'll be giving up any of our office space, but I do believe we'll be changing how we work on a go-forward basis. We continue to focus on our clients and what we can do to help them through this. We know that the small business community is the backbone of our community, not only from the services they provide, but the jobs that they provide as well. You know, we try to do whatever we can to help them, and that's a kind of a key focus. We're also, as a business ourselves, you know, focused on making sure that we're doing things prudently. We're not growing positions. We're trying to keep everybody employed that we have on board, and trying to, you know, continue to provide the services that we have without having to grow our expenses so that we can maintain. Personally, you know, I've got my oldest is a junior at the University of Maryland. It's been a very interesting year for her, going through what she's going through, going to campus, being remote, back and forth, and two other children in the Howard County school system. My youngest of which is really enjoying remote learning. At 14, he seems to be able to handle it well. My oldest, my middle daughter, sorry, is a senior, is very disappointed that she's not going to get to experience her senior year at school, but hey, she understands what's going on. She's now currently doing her college applications for the fall. We are optimistic that she will be able to do that in the fall, but we'll see. So, and I'm excited about just learning more about how we can help and guide, you know, give advice to those in the county that can you know, make the decisions that we need to make as we go through this process. And I'll remind everybody, as I do every year, and as was reminded to me, you know, doesn't matter what the committees have said in the past. This is this committee, and this is the future. And the information that we have is what we have, and we need to look at everything deeply and understand what we're seeing, and give the recommendations that make sense for the information that we receive. So thanks everybody for volunteering to be on the committee, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for the leadership. Next, I think JTAB is not able to make it, so I'll go with.
I'm here.
Oh, you're here, JTAB. Go ahead. Sorry
Hi.
about. Go ahead.
No worries. I've been on. I'm sorry. I've been using my phone, so you may not be seeing my name pop up. It may be whatever the phone name looks like on here. So good morning, everybody. Jahan Siddiqui. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the Howard County Public School System. And this is probably my, I think,
I think your voice was lost in the middle of the sentence. Hello? Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we're
Okay.
we're now. Okay, go
All
ahead.
right, perfect. Sorry. Hantaf Siddiqui, Chief Administrative Officer for the Howard County Public School System. Look forward to a very productive conversation with all of you over these next few weeks. As I was saying, I'm not sure how much of that got cut off. This is probably my 5th or 6th time, I believe, serving on spending affordability. I oversee the school system's budget, finance, and communications operations, and we have been, as some of you shared, and Steve, you talked about your children's experiences with virtual instruction and hybrid learning. We've been in a virtual mode since the pandemic started on March 16th, March 16th was the first Monday that we were closed for. We just marked the 8-month point of when students were last in our buildings. This has been quite the transition for the school system as we had to adapt quickly to provide continuity of learning in the spring to ensure that a level of learning still occurred, and then get ready to really be completely virtual for the first semester. And as the board made the decision earlier this week, we will be virtual again for the 3rd quarter as well, which would put us through April 14th. And at the same time, we will continue to enhance the small group learning centers that we stood up about a month ago. We did make a decision earlier this week based on the growing number of cases in the county to close all of the small group learning centers through the end of November, and then we will continue to reevaluate the status of those learning centers as we monitor the metrics along with the Howard County Health Department. It's certainly challenging because ideally we would have all of our students in our buildings, our who do a wonderful job of nurturing and educating our students have really this is not what their training was. They're used to providing support. They're used to providing an education in our buildings, and in an ideal world we would be back in our buildings as soon as possible so that our students can start to receive that face-to-face support and nurturing that they need, and in an ideal world, we would be, as a system, we would have been at a point where we had a 1-to-1 student-to-device ratio, so that all of our students had Chromebooks. So in the spring, in late March, we moved very quickly, working with the Board of Education and their support to purchase Chromebooks for our students. And then through a combination of our savings and some CARES Act funding, we were able to advance the 1-to-1 initiative. Now, the challenge for us has been that there is a national or an international backlog of Chromebook orders. So while we have the sufficient funding to achieve that 1-to-1 ratio, we are still waiting on some of those shipments, and anxiously anticipate every time we're expecting a shipment, because that means the faster we can roll out those devices to our students. And at this point, we've provided devices for all elementary students, and then we are working to ensure that any middle and high school students who need a device, to get them a device, whether it's a Chromebook or a repurposed laptop from our schools, at least until we get the new Chromebooks delivered. It's certainly been a budget challenge for us as well. We've seen about $23 million in unanticipated COVID-19 related costs for a combination of technology, PPE, food services. As you know, we have been providing food and grab-and-go meals to all of our students since the pandemic started, and we continue to operate all of our meal sites daily. Thanks to the U.S. Department of Agriculture and their support, we are able to provide meals for all Howard County families and students, or I'm sorry, all Howard County students under the age of 18 without anybody having to pay. So that's been one operation that we've been able to continue through the summer and into this year. And that approval from USDE while it is subject to available funding, that approval is through the end of the current school year or at the end of the current fiscal year. So we have that. With the board's decision on Monday, we are evaluating our budget and really understanding, where we might see some savings and where we might see some additional expenditures in providing resources and standing up additional small learning centers so that some of our students who are the most vulnerable can come in and receive the supports and services in person that they may need. So we are reevaluating that. While at the same time looking ahead to fiscal year 22, and the biggest conversation for us really there is the sustainability. While we've been able to use these one-time savings and the CARES Act funding to help us stand up the technology that we need and help us stand up the infrastructure that we need to support virtual instruction, we do need to talk about how we would sustain that moving forward into future years. One of the data points that I used with some business leaders recently was we went from supporting device usage in our buildings to some of our computer labs and some of our carts, and supporting our over 8,000 full-time staff members with their technology, to now supporting nearly 60,000 students and their families with their devices, including providing technical support, providing help desk support, without really any increase in staffing. So that's certainly something that has put a strain on the system, and we now need to look at how do we sustain that infrastructure. So certainly lots of challenges there from an education standpoint, but also lots of budget issues, and I'm sure we'll have lots of conversations over these next few weeks.
Thank you, Jinhab. Yes, as you said, there will be a lot of discussion going forward to talk about the challenge and how to address that in coming weeks there or months. Next, Josh.
Hey, Josh Zucker. I am on the committee, I think, for the 5th or 6th year, and I'm a citizen member. I'm not affiliated with any Howard County department or part of a community group. But I do work for Oracle, where I'm an attorney that does mostly antitrust and privacy matters. But we have a pretty large building and a larger footprint in Howard County. We have a building you can see from 95 in Columbia Gateway, where we have 400 workers. And then we have another building, which is essentially in Anne Arundel County at Annapolis Junction, that works with NSA, that has another 600 workers. So we all in have a Howard County presence of around 1,100 Oracle employees who right now, except for those that have to work in a SCIF, are all remote. And we will continue to be all remote until at least next September. So as folks have said previously, Todd and Dan and others, that the impacts that this has on commercial real estate are immense, and we're going to have to figure out how we go about preparing Howard County for an environment where I think what has happened is that the economy, as far as work from home, has, no pun intended, zoomed ahead 15 years. We at Oracle do cloud computing and software, and we can be all remote. And obviously our customer base has expanded tremendously because more companies need to be in the cloud, more commercial has to be in the cloud. And our corporate clients are expanding work from home. And that has, if you look at just looking at the stock market, the companies that are doing the best are the ones that are providing a lot of this cloud infrastructure. And we are one of the top 5 companies in cloud infrastructure. So that's been great for our bottom line. Obviously, what people have been saying is that this is a K-shaped recovery, even if we are in a recovery at all. where there are certain companies that just by how they have their products situated are taking off, and a lot of other companies aren't. If you subtract out from the S&P 500 that Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Apple were actually have year-over-year losses. And I think the fact that the economy is this unequal is really telling. So that has to be part of our discussion because, quite frankly, if Oracle with a huge office building in Columbia Gateway doesn't necessarily need our commercial real estate footprint there, and we're not going to have employees inside that office until September at the earliest, there's got to be dozens of law firms, everything else that that are going to be in the same boat. As a Howard County resident, just as a parent, I'll just say this as an aside. We have 2 kids that are in remote learning this year. And my wife has a doctorate in education where she puts together curriculum and assessments for school systems across the country, working mostly with under-resourced schools. So she has a lot of rural schools in Mississippi. She has Baltimore City. She has schools in Memphis and Nashville, and urban and rural schools. So she has a really good idea of how our kids are doing with remote. And we got our kids' assessment the other day. Between the 2 of them, they have 1B, all A's. I don't think either one of us would say that what they've learned in the first quarter or first semester equals the greatest achievement they've had academically. I think the bar has been lowered as far as remote learning goes, both for what our kids are learning and how our teachers are teaching. This is just me candidly, and I know that they're with folks on the school board and at the superintendent's office, just saying this for their benefit. I think we are not happy with how a lot of the decisions were made from last spring on. I'm going to give the school system credit for trying to get as much done last spring in a crisis that nobody anticipated. But the lack of really original thinking, and somewhat the fact that we have not followed the science as well as we should have from the president on down, keeping bars open while schools were closed just really angers me. And we could have done better for the economy by trying to keep some of these non-businesses limited while getting kids back into school so parents could get back to work. Instead, we have really hurt some of our poorest workers, hurt businesses, and I think the economic damage is just going to continue to metastasize for the next few years. So it's just candidly where I am. And if you want to see more of my candid thoughts, join me on Facebook. Other than that, happy to be on this. And I think this is really probably, like I said, I've been on this for 5 years, and I can't imagine a more important year to be on this. So I look forward to working with everybody.
Thank you, Jasper, for your perspective. Next is Dr. Wu.
Thank you, Dr. Swin, and thank you, Mr. Tucker, for your opinion or feedback for the school system. And this is Dr. Chow from Howard County Board of Education. And Mr. Siddiqui introduced a lot. I think for me, I just want to talk about from some other different perspective. I think many people may realize we have a student enrollment decline around 2000. And in normal, we actually have 800 to 100 student increase. So that means in total, we see around 3,000 students decrease this year, unfortunately. And for me, I think I really worry about the quality of virtual learning. We hear a lot about from the community and students, and we're trying our best. I think this never happened before. It's just unfortunately difficult, and it takes time, and there's so many constraints. So I think we'll keep really try to explore, try to see how we can improve. And we worry about the mental health of our students. And just this week, we actually heard about another suicide of our high school students. And it's really heartbroken for me to hear that. I think we just really need to really keep talking with our families and students, make sure they take care of themselves very well during this difficult time. We're not able to have like a normal athletic program. I think that's one part, a very important part of our student life, and we're lacking that. That really kind of increases their mental pressure as well. I think ultimately, it's really safely our student and staff is really highest priority. We want to make sure, even we consider, for example, hybrid model for this school, we need to provide that as our highest priority. Make sure anything we're done properly. In terms of the budget, I think it's really the question for the board, for the schools. Are we able to get the MOU for the next year? I think we'll learn more from Dr. Sun later. What's the budget prediction? And if we're not able to get that, how we're able to handle that? I hope we will get that. So last one, I think is really the capital project. We have 3 ongoing capital projects: High School 13, Highland High School, and Tap Spring Elementary School. Are we able to really, because we got the first year money, but I think it's my concerns, are we able to move forward without any delays or see bridge the gap, not in maybe more than 1 year, right? Are we able to really help them maybe next summer? Because I believe with the situation improving, something differently and innovatively next summer to help our students. That's something I'm
Hello? Okay, thank you. I think there's a little bit streaming issue just now. Dr. Wu? I think we cannot hear you now. Previously it's doing fine. It just now started to some streaming.
I think you finished talking.
Okay. Hello? I really couldn't hear anything currently. Dr. Wu, I think we heard the first like 4 minutes on that. I don't know whether you have a closing remark to make.
Okay, so I just talk about the capital project.
Oh.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yes.
all. I think it's really, I think because this is a pandemic, we're not opening to come back to school. I just wonder whether the school system is able to provide something new beyond the school year, maybe next summer, because I think the pandemic will be under control at that time. So are we to do something to help our students to compensate for their loss of learning and loss of education for next summer? That's something when you think about it, and where do we get the money for that? I think that's the concern for me for the moment.
Yeah, thank you very much, and welcome on board, Dr. Wu. With that, I think we finished very well for our meeting. So let me just make sure I go to the next slide and wish everybody and your family a wonderful holiday season, because we're not going to see each other again until December 3rd. And I also want to take a moment to thank our IT department, DCS, for significant help and try to actually make this web meeting very smooth and helpful. Thank you so much, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you.